You are now listening to Carlie's Couch.
I'm Carlie.
And I'm Lex.
In this podcast, we discuss a wide array of topics about life and how to live your best life,
whatever that looks like for you.
Hope y'all enjoy. This week on Carlie's Couch, an often celebrated and revered personality trait, we explore hyperindependence.
Welcome to Carlie's Couch. I'm Lextopia. We got CC Fierce / Carlie Carpio to my right, your left. If you're watching on YouTube, thanks for all the subscribes. Thanks for liking. Thanks for sharing the episodes. We hope you keep doing more of the same.
Yeah, we appreciate you. As always, we're going to start with our question from the couch. We have some very random answers, but what is the best dish you cook?
So the first ones are bacon, which you can't mess bacon up.
You can.
But if that's the best thing you do, that's not even a dish, actually. So, okay.
Agree.
Gumbo, that's delicious. Yeah. And we can question authenticity. Mm-hmm. Another person said mac and cheese. Very important. You can definitely mess that up. That could definitely be the best thing you cook for sure.
Yep. Another said sweet potato pie. Very easy to mess up. Steak, also easy to mess up. Brisket, definitely easy to mess up. If you know your way around a giant slab of meat, then I can trust that you can usually cook other things too. And then greens, which is super easy to mess up. So yes, I appreciate those.
A lot of these are regional and all that too, though. So quite frankly, really, I need to see the photos of these to tell you perhaps if some of these yeses might get a no. But also somebody said spaghetti. Somebody said breakfast, all of it, which I have a friend who also all they want to do is do breakfast. And then somebody said cook. So I guess this is not the question for them. So yeah, thank you all. I wonder how many of you guys made those dishes for the recent holiday, since a lot of these would have been pretty good Thanksgiving foods too.
What's your best dish? Do you have one that you claim?
Not really. There's different things that I used to have people always want me to bring to events and stuff, which was like banana pie, banana pudding, and might have been some other things. But like I've gone through different like phases of cooking and stuff, but I can cook anything. So like it just isn't a big thing for me.
Yeah,
I don't have a thing.
I say mine. If someone were to ask that, mine would be shrimp and grits. Like I love making it, and that's like a thing. But also I love cooking and cook all the time and anything.
Okay. Get your shrimp and grits over at Carlie's counter. Today we're going to talk about hyperindependence, which is interesting. The first thing that comes to my mind is of women when we say that, which is interesting because I feel like there is a lot of women. There's a lot of tropes around like strong black women. It's just a lot of different things where you think about women who, in a sense, want to feel empowered and can do everything themselves and or don't want to feel that they have to be attached to the other sex or the patriarchy, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the first things that come to my mind is when I think of hyperindependence is of women who fall into that space of, well, they want to do everything themselves and like they're not waiting for anybody and nobody's going to stop them.
Same. And we'll get into a lot of the reasons why, but the definition of hyperindependence is an intense form of self-reliance where a person feels compelled to handle all responsibilities and challenges alone, often refusing help or support even when needed. They depend solely on themselves. Well, this is another facet of it, but they depend solely on themselves to avoid vulnerability or disappointment.
Mm-hmm. So hyperindependence is not a good thing, and that's because there is two parts of that word, hyper and independent. So being an independent person, nothing wrong with that. There's a healthy level of independence that you can have. But then it's that hyper independence part that signifies to us, you're doing too much. So how does regular independence differ from hyper independence in case you're like, oh no, is this me? Maybe, maybe not.
Or in some instances, definitely yes. I think a big moniker of the difference between hyper-independence and healthy independence is the ability to ask for help or accept help whenever you need it. Mm-hmm. And that is a balance and shows you're able to be vulnerable, but also know you don't have to do everything on your own. And so it's your ability to ask for help whenever you need it, but also to accept it.
Mm-hmm. And then watch the intensity to which you do things and the motivations. I often see people post about how they, I don't even ask because I know I got to do it all myself, or nobody can do things as well as me, or, if you have that mindset, or if you think about that as you go into task and decide then not to ask for help, then you may be hyper independent. And there's a lot of origins for people becoming hyper independent, most of which are around the fact that at some point you were let down. Somebody said they was going to do something, or maybe you hoped somebody was going to do something and they didn't, because sometimes we can make our own little games in our head. But at some point, for a lot of folks who are now hyper independent, they just have been very let down by the people around them. And whether that's because your family may not have had a lot of money and so they couldn't help, or if it's, your boy stabbed you in the back and, some whatever else, and they chose to betray you. Either way, that may have festered in you to realize that you cannot look to anybody else for help, because so far it seems like nobody has been there.
Yeah, and we're definitely, as women, Black women specifically, but also brown, indigenous women, like, society kind of forced a lot of things on them and us to be independent and have to do certain things by ourselves and all that. And so that also travels down. And so thinking about how generational trauma comes down, how society has enforced that on us, and then enforced those familial systems, like you said, where people just didn't have that reliable support, either in time, in presence, money, etc., love, all of those things.
And keep in mind that it is a defense mechanism. So those origins that we talked about, whether it be, being let down by society or society shaping things in that way, or the fact that you didn't have reliable people around you, or betrayals in your life, you are now making the decision to be hyper independent because you don't want to feel those ways. And so this is your way of coping with that. It's a way that you are defending yourself against that hurt. So thinking about that now, it makes obvious sense to me that one of the biggest kind of downfalls of being hyper independent is that you're now going to feel isolated, because essentially you are isolating yourself. You're not even letting people help you get close to you or be able to support, even if they could.
And it's just fostering a bad sense of emotional well-being overall, because not only do you feel isolated, but you feel like nobody's going to help you. You're living your life in a way where nobody could help you, even if they wanted to. So it's just reinforcing this. So now you feel alone. You feel forced to be alone. You're resentful and angry about having to do everything by yourself, or that people aren't supporting you. And it just is like building and building and building. It becomes a lot of stress on you. I would also say it really affects your health.
Mm-hmm. And it affects your health too, because not only do you kind of have this like ill will of the world and you feel like you have to do the most, but because you probably do the most, now you're all burnt out. Because you do the most and because you're burnt out, it doesn't really matter how much you do, because you're not moving probably effective and efficient as you actually could. And because a lot of times we have a ceiling. If I'm hyper independent, that's cool. That just means I can only get as far as I can get. And we all know the stories that there are so many embassies. There are so many empires that have been built because of people's support and help in some kind of way, whether it's people introducing you to somebody, whether it's investment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can't do everything by yourself. If you do, you can only go to a certain level. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, together is really the only way that we can move forward.
But then it also leads to resentment of others as well, because during this whole time that you have said this story about how nobody can do things like you, nobody has helped you, nobody cares, nobody is asking me how I'm doing, working on this or that, et cetera, you are building up resentment, continued resentment that's putting you in this cycle. And meanwhile, people don't even know what's going on with you. I said to somebody, I was like, oh yeah, they don't check in about something with work or something like that. And they're like, well, do they even know what's going on with you? And then my answer was like, not really. But also, I realized I also didn't talk about it with them, because I was like, they actually have shown me in the past that, like, they don't really have anything to add there, so that's why I don't. And so really what the finality of that combo was just that, oh, okay, well, why would I even expect certain help from certain people? So definitely you still have to have discernment and make it make sense where you reach out for help or where you expect people to be there for you, because everybody doesn't have the same capacity. But if you isolate yourself, you're only going to continue to resent people and probably be by yourself for a while.
And so for signs of hyperindependence, emotional distance and isolation, it's not just about being able to be by yourself and enjoy your own company. Like, that's a great thing. That's actually a healthy sign of independence. But it's about a deep-seated fear of, like, letting people in, of being scared they're going to hurt you, or knowing that they're going to let you down, which leads to this cycle of loneliness, in this facade of you don't need anybody, you can do everything by yourself, da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah, I love that. It leads to a cycle of loneliness despite the facade of self-sufficiency. So a sign that you may be hyper independent could be the fact that if you look at your own media, if all you put forward is how you're able to do everything yourself and that you're doing this and you're doing that and all of the like, then counter that with how you really feel about yourself and the things that you're doing. Does it feel as dope as it looks? And if you're focused on putting out there that it looks a certain way, then you might be falling into this space. Another piece of that too is that definitely incorporating more we language and our and like team and other people. If that's hard for you to do that, then you might be hyper independent. And or you might just not have a team, which also I think that could be a sign, is like if you just don't really have people around you in general. If you're working by yourself, if you're not going out, if you're not doing too much communications, then you're probably hyper independent. If you're also like super busy and doing the most.
And a lot of that is because you're avoiding vulnerability. So, for example, if you don't have a team for your business, you might be scared people are going to let you down. Maybe someone let you down in the past, but also maybe you're ashamed of not having all your stuff together. And so you want to make it look like you're good. And so you don't ask for help because then people will see how bad your finances really are, or whatever really is going on behind this facade. And that makes it difficult to like really connect with other people to then actually get the help that you need.
Mm-hmm. And all of those things, you also don't trust people. And so, of course, you're not going to open up to them and end up in a space where you can't be vulnerable also. You may be hyper independent if you have an overwhelming need of control, even in like relationships or things with other people. If everything has to kind of go your way, or in your mind there's like this one roadmap that has to be followed, then that's a sign you're only depending on, you know, your own thoughts and what you want to, how you think things should happen, etc. And so open up to allow other people to act, even taking some of that like out of your mind, like allow other people to kind of come up with the ideas and to lead in different settings as well.
Yeah, because this stems from trauma. Hyperindependence stems from trauma. And so it's amazing that you were able to get through the things that you had to get through whenever you had to be a hyperindependent and you really were by yourself. Like my mom worked, like we were very poor and she worked a whole bunch of jobs. So I was by myself a lot. I am really good at being by myself, at doing things by myself. I am good at being my own parent. That's why I'm so strict on myself. There's all these things. But the difference is like those coping mechanisms that helped me survive back then do not help me now. And so if I want to have healthy relationships and be able to be intimate and be vulnerable with people, I really had to approach this hyper independence and recognize that I don't have to do that anymore. And I want to be in a loving and supportive relationship where I can trust my partner to also be there for me. And so when we're looking at how it impacts your life, like that's how. If you want to have open, vulnerable relationships where you don't have to do everything, where you can be soft or you can let people try to, you know, support you and show up for you, then you actually have to face your hyper independence.
Mm-hmm. And it makes sense for a lot of people with maybe their earlier relationships, if they grew up realizing they can't depend on a parent or their parents, which are people who brought you into the world, right? And like, who else can you depend on? If you've been let down by your parents in any way, you can imagine that somebody may have a fear of dependency, and a very deep-rooted fear of trusting people from even being there for you the way that they say, just because you have not seen that. And so if you are a person who's fearful of being too dependent on somebody, which keeps you kind of apart from folks and to keeping a certain space in between you, then that's also a sign of hyper independence. And like Carlie was saying, it impacts your life so much because of, first of all, like with relationships, right? You can't get close to anybody that you can't be vulnerable with. Truly, you feel close with people who are there with you in something, like, you know, going through something, whether they support you, however small or large. Giving people the opportunity to help or even letting them in the first place on what's going on is always just going to be something that strengthens and makes your relationships a little bit more intimate and strong.
Yep. It can also affect your career, your business, and your mental health because you're burnt out trying to do everything by yourself. You can also only grow as far as your brain knows ideas and can push yourself and your energy. And so imagine how you could amplify that if you had fresh energy on your team, you had somebody to bounce ideas off with to help you execute and do different stuff. And so when thinking about, not only does it affect your relationships, it really impacts your business and your career life too.
Mm-hmm. And imagine being hyper independent is being in a survival mindset, because only in a survival space is it like you can only depend on you, and right now, like, that's all you have, but you don't. So it's almost like you're saying F you to all the resources and people and things that have been put in the world around you that are here to help grow with you and help you to move through and accomplish like what you're here to do.
And for all my manifesting mommies and poppies and people, if you're shutting yourself down for help and energy and love from other people, then you're telling the universe you don't need anything else. And so it's just furthering your story that you really have to do everything by yourself, because that's what you're telling the universe.
And you know what's so funny about that is that oftentimes when you're in those spaces, because I wouldn't define myself as like hyper independent, but I know I can be extremely independent and have maybe been in periods that could have been seen as hyper independent. But what's the funniest thing about it is that the whole time what you really wish for is like somebody to save you from that whole thing. When you are going so hard or like things don't feel like they are panning out the right way or just enough, right? Because you might be fine, but like even thinking about being burnt out, or if you're a business owner especially, or something where it's like you're really going hard during the day and the night, and it's like, hey, what if you actually, instead of just kind of imagining and fantasizing about being saved or that something's going to happen, like you're shooting your own self in the foot and you're holding your own self back because it's actually not that hard. Man, I'll see on social and somebody's like, hey, I'm really looking for these, you know, two things, like I want to do 2 projects about this, or even just talking about the work you want to do, or like, hey, I really need somebody who can help me with running ads, or, you know, whatever, right? Like people all the time talk about what they need, and there's so many stories that come out of that and growth and building from that. And once you realize how much other people can actually assist, then you realize you're like actually free in a space to recognize how bombarded you were trying to do everything yourself. So like, it's one thing to hope people help you or wish that somebody would, but you truly have to take the steps for people to even know what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's a huge one. And whenever you do, imagine how much free energy you have whenever you're not fighting for your life every day to survive and to make sure you get everything done. How much fresh new energy you can focus on new projects, can pour into a relationship, can adventure the world, can actually spend time doing things that that bring you joy and that pour into you. Like that's why this is so important. And so we've talked about how it impacts us. We talked about where it came from, what it looks like in our lives. What are some things that we can do to start to heal from hyperindependence?
Well, first take a look and stock at your life and consider spaces where you may be hyper independent, and those are probably the spaces where you feel resentment, like, gosh, I wish I had some help here. And then next, I would say, now look at your efforts for closing that gap. So my steps are kind of that I would think about are a little more like the tactical ones of assessing, like writing that down, seeing where you could use help or how, and then actually like expressing that, even if it's like on a LinkedIn or something, as opposed to like you just calling your friend randomly. But that's one thing I would say like in real life to do.
Yeah, I think that's important. Being mindful about where you are and being very compassionate with yourself, because this is hard. Like I said, you developed these coping mechanisms for a reason. You needed them at one point in your life, and now they're no longer serving you, and it could be harming you. And so it takes a little bit of work to make peace with that and realize, like, Yeah, people are going to disappoint me. Even whenever you do start to open up and start to ask for help, people will disappoint you. Even people that you love, even people that normally have space, people will disappoint you. And it is a practice to learn when to ask for stuff. It's okay for people to say no, and being okay with that and recognizing that that doesn't mean that you then have to still do everything by yourself. So being mindful with yourself, being kind to yourself on this journey, and also recognizing that it's okay for people to disappoint you sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And you can do that by starting slow and being gradual, and by challenging yourself to, when you're out and about, maybe it's thinking about how you could be vulnerable in small ways, or even in like conversations, of course, with the people you already know, in meetings, etc. Right? I think we've all had times where it's like maybe there's something you kind of that comes up in your mind that you might want to say, or a thought, but like you're like, nah. So sometimes it's like, practice your discernment and go ahead and say the thing, or be vulnerable, or express what you need to express, because you never know also how much somebody wants to support and help you and be there for you. There are so many people in my life I already know that for me, if I actually had something that I need to ask for, like I already know that I could get the things that I need, or that I will have that support. And so definitely take a look at your relationships and honor them by being vulnerable enough to allow them to see inside and to be able to be there for you as they can.
Let people be a blessing. Let them pour into you. You never know how that fills them up too. And whenever you never ask for help, you're also taking away that gift from them of being able to support you and love on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because one thing about independent people too, a lot of times you end up also being extra helping other people while you're being hyper independent. So it's like, stop all that. Like, it's okay for you to not be there for everybody. Also be there for you. Allow the people to be there for you too.
You deserve that.
Yeah. So this week assess that. Look at how you're being hyper independent and how it may be affecting you and your relationships. And we will chat with you next week.
Bye, y'all.